poverty really a mindset that can be undone by education and new habits? Are Black people disproportionately impacted by generational poverty and lack simply because we don't have enough information or we suffer from poor implementation? Is there data or historical information to suggest that there are actually systemic and structural barriers that keep Black people from building and accumulating wealth here in this country? I'm so glad you asked because we are talking about it after the break.
Brokers, welcome to another episode of Brokish, where we talk about the unbelievable ish this country has done to keep us broke. Now here are your hosts, Amber and Erika.
Hello, brokers. I'm Amber.
And I'm Erika.
And today, surprise, surprise, we are talking about some more false bull crap that John Hope Bryant said. Specifically, that poverty is a mindset.
It's all in your mind, Amber. It's all on where you put your thoughts. But before we talk, you said bullcrap. Is that so? Y'all, we're recording this on a Sunday. Is that because we're doing this on a Sunday? Because I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard you say anything like bullcrap before. What's going on?
Unlike Erika, I did go to the house of the Lord to worship today. And on my way home, I was listening to, John P. Key and the Clark sisters. And so, because I am filled and out of my overflow is coming a new way of talking and a new way of being. So come on, somebody. Come on.
Well, I'm glad to know that the message did not fall onto ground that was not fertile. I am glad to know that you were able to receive it. And look at you, Amber, thriving with your bullcrap.
Come on.
So other than going to church and shaming the people who didn't go to church, what have you been up to?
Well, y'all know I've been looking for a job, which is really ghetto. I'm so tired of talking about myself. Okay. I really am. I don't want nobody else to. I mean, not this self. Like we could talk about bundles. We could talk about nails. We could talk about getting bodies done. But like in terms of, what are my strengths and weaknesses? I'm so tired.
Look at the material weaknesses.
Okay. I'm so tired of having a fake question in my pocket. My question is, are you going to hire me or can I go now? Okay. That's my question. And so really I've been, just doing that and not being able to sit up and, I thought unemployment was I was going to be watching TV all day, living my best lazy life. And it's just very unfortunate that I haven't been able to do that. And so I'm kind of sad about it.
I'm sorry. But I do hope that if it is your hope that you get a job, that one will come to you soon. That is what I do hope.
I do hope that. And I know my mortgage company hopes that too, because my mindset right now is not quite poverty, but it's like approaching poverty. Okay.
And you cannot use your mindset to pay your mortgage. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Okay. You see what I'm saying?
Well, since I know you was about to ask me what I've been up to, let me just jump right to it. So y'all, I am actually I'm gonna be in New York City on Valentine's Day. I'm gonna be with my booze, my husband and my kids. So all of the booze are gonna be together. But anyway, because of that, we've got to record a little bit early. Mm-hmm. And so that means today is Super Bowl Sunday. And I'm busy getting my food ready for Super Bowl Sunday. So
listen, tell the people what is on the menu at Casa de la Brown.
You're so messy. Okay. I so because I'm Negro, there's Rotel dip. Like what Super Bowl party doesn't have that, right? Like, so there is Rotel dip.
Good job.
I am also gonna make, I'm gonna be fancy. I'm gonna make those Southwestern chicken egg rolls from Chili's. Shout out to Chili's.
That lady said fancy and Chili's in the same sentence. I love that. I love it.
I am. I'm gonna do me some mozzarella sticks. I'm gonna make, I'm gonna roll them in my breadcrumbs and everything myself. I bought me a little marinara to dip them in. Okay. I'm gonna make some chicken wings because also Negro. And Amber, I bought, because I'm also fancy, I got 8 ounces of crab meat. Girl, I'm gonna make me like 2 crab cakes. That's all I had the money for.
Y'all, The jokes write themselves. That lady said she finna make 2 crab cakes. That lady got 4 people in her family, 2 children and a husband. And that lady said she gonna make 2 crab cakes.
They don't really like crab cakes like that. So that's really for me.
Maybe
And
poverty really is a mindset. Okay, maybe poverty really is a mindset.
maybe John Hope Bryant was right. But for real, and before anybody comes in here, because Amber, the brokers are great, but sometimes there are people who are watching and listening to the show who are not brokers, who are just haters. And they're like, oh my God, y'all watching the Super Bowl. So let's just put all that to the side. First of all, I'm in it for the food. Okay. I'm not in it for the festivities. I don't know. Besides, they not like us. I don't know. Mr. Lamar, I don't know his music. I'm not familiar with that young man. I
And
don't know what's
he's
going
not
on.
singing it. So I'm not watching nothing. Okay. I'm making my man some food because my husband is really nice to me and he really do everything I tell him to do. And I love that for him and me. And I don't mean like that, but I mean he always, whenever I ask him to help me, he always help me. He makes my life really easy. And that man asked me for some chicken wings and some spinach and artichoke dip, and I'm gonna make it for him. But I'm not watching the Super
Amen.
Bowl, but
Amen.
that's the least I can
Yeah.
do.
We in it for the fun. We in it for the food. We not in it for the football because we don't like. So y'all quit hating. We just getting involved. Everybody else is doing the Super Bowl. We doing the Super Bowl too because that's community. We in community
Right.
with the people. So that's what's happening.
I will say one exception. I
Okay.
am team Jalen Hurts. I love how he moves. I love that he has built his business with a team of Black women. He got a Black publicist, a Black agent, a Black lawyer.
Beyonce.
A Black fiance, all these Black women. So listen, if we can't destroy, capitalism, I'm glad there's some Black people eating off of it. And so I'm team Jalen Hurts. I don't know nothing else, but I love that for him.
Yes. Yes.
I love that for him.
And I want to say he's from the Houston area.
He is from Houston.
One of our favorite hosts of this show. So that's awesome as well.
Yes. Maybe y'all met when you filmed your episode of Scared Straight. I mean, y'all are not the same age, but all the kids in Houston. Don't y'all go through the Scared Straight curriculum before y'all graduate from the
What's
public
so
school?
sad, I'm ignoring that part. I'm sad about the fact that I could be his mama. That's the part that I am very sad about. Like, if we keeping it all the way real, like,
that's
I could have been bouncing him on my knee. But anyway.
Listen.
Yes. But Amber, we're
stand
here.
up.
H-time. You know what I'm saying? But seriously, we are here to and Amber, we did not know when we started this season that it was going to take a whole season to debunk all the crazy stuff that John Hope Bryant came on the show and opened the mouth that God gave him to spew to our listeners and viewers. So here we are. But hopefully this is the last episode that we're devoting to this, right? We're nearing the end of our season. We want to close things out. And so we do want to talk about this idea of poverty being a mindset, right? It's all just up here, right? Like if you could just change the way that you think and everything else will change. And I do think, and you tell me if you think this too, Amber, I do think that there is power in your mind for sure. Setting your thoughts on a thing, right? Like speaking those things that are not as though they were.
Yes.
Right. I think that is absolutely a thing and there is power in that. But I want us to be careful with how we just toss that around and make it seem like that's all that people have to do.
No, I agree. I think that there is overwhelming evidence that poverty is an intentional, deliberate creation of capitalism. And I think when you tell people that poverty originates out of their mind, you're doing nothing but shaming and blaming them for not being able to overcome hurdles that were literally built to be insurmountable. And I think it is a form of violence. It's a form of gaslighting. And it's a way to keep people chasing their tail so that they do not realize what the real enemy is that they should be fighting.
Absolutely. And to have that conversation, we did not want to do it with just ourselves today. So y'all, we have a guest on the show with us today. And Amber, in the spirit of, calling out those things that are not as though they were, we have with us Dr. Taylor Dark, right? Although she is a PhD candidate, she is very soon to be doctor. So we're going to call her one. She's a doctor in our hearts. And she is at Florida State University. And her work and research focuses on policies designed to address historical, racial, and economic inequalities. And it also examines initiatives such as reparations aimed at remedying injustices like slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow laws. But notably, Dr. Darks is investigating the reparations program in Evanston, Illinois, which seeks to redress decades of segregation and housing discrimination. And in addition to her research, she serves as an adjunct instructor in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at Florida A&M University, where she teaches courses such as Introduction to Sociology, Social Problems, girl, me too, I teach social problems, and Sociological Theory. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from FAMU and a Master of Science in Sociology from Florida State University. Beyond academia, she has a passion for writing and has released a picture book with HarperCollins titled Be Black Girl Be.
Love it.
Dr. Darks, welcome to Brokish.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yes. And so we are so happy that you came and joined us, and especially on such short notice. But that's what community is, right? When you put out the call, Amber, the people jump in and they accept the call. So
that's called God's goodness and grace.
So Taylor did that. Thank you so much. But because at least I am a genteel Southern woman, Amber's just Southern. And in our tradition, we usually start with just tell us a little bit about who you are and who your people are.
Okay, my name is Taylor Darks, soon to be Dr. Taylor Darks at the end of this semester. I am originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. Moved to Tallahassee, Florida to go to Florida A&M University back in 2016.
Shout out to the Rattlers.
Rattlers, yep. Shout out to the Rattlers. Graduated there, went to Florida State across the street, and I've been there ever since. Graduating this semester, super excited. And yeah, here to talk to y'all today.
Perfect. And so, just like the brokers, that's what we call people who listen to and watch our show. We've been dealing with John Hill Bryant, and, we tried to be hospitable, but there was just so much stuff and want to talk about it. So today, of course, this idea of poverty being a mindset. And so we want to just start by talking about, in your estimation, some of the economic and social factors that have prevented Black people from amassing financial success in the United States beyond just a poverty mindset.
Well, I really want to tap into this analogy I saw on social media. I actually found the video that I will send to you afterwards. And this woman talked about essentially the Black community being in a game of Monopoly. And that if you were in a game of Monopoly with no money, no housing, no property for 400 years, and then all of a sudden told to catch up, where would you be? And the analogy is great. She explains it so well. She does such a good job. Yes. So I can't wait to link it to you all. But I think that's what we have to think about when we think about poverty and inequality in the United States, is that there was a massive head start. And essentially the idea that Black people should just pull themselves up from their bootstraps, or that they're in a poverty mindset, or it's the way they're thinking or handling their money, is cultural racism. It's this idea that Black people inherently don't have it. They can't catch up because they're culturally different than white Americans or other types of Americans. And I think that in itself is a problem.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you started off that way, talking about the 400-year history, because one of the guests that we had on not too long ago came to talk to us about the Freedmen's Bank, and talked about the fact that, like, even when we did try to play catch up, right? Like, after having been enslaved, we deposited our money into what we thought was like a savings bank. And then a lot of people lost those deposits because of mismanagement and because of negligence of the white people running the bank. Or even if you look at a system like sharecropping that sprung up after that, where there were Black people who were literally being cheated, who were working every year and being told that they were in the red, either because they could not read or write, or when they could read or write and they knew they were being cheated, the threat of violence, they didn't say anything. And so I think it's very interesting how when we talk about this poverty as a mindset, like, people love to start in the middle of the story, like talking about today, right? Without looking at the past history. And so the question I have for you is about what you've kind of uncovered in your work, or if you researched it, about the very intentional ways we remix or rewrite or even distort, I think that's the better word, the history of what's happened to Black people in this country when it comes to our ability to earn wealth?
I absolutely love that question. You actually hit my dissertation nail on the head. So I'm so excited to speak to that. So one of the big theories I use in my dissertation is this idea of racial stories. One of the main authors is Benilla Silva, who is the coiner of colorblind racism. And the idea of racial stories is like these are myths. So in the article, him and others talk about this idea of the black male rapist being a myth that was used to control entire communities, and also keep them in a sense of fear. And so this myth isn't rooted in truth. And so within my dissertation, I kind of come up with a new term called racial realities. And so I kind of use these two terms to contrast each other. So as Benilla Silva and others talk about racial stories as a way to oppress, keep down, discriminate, racial realities are a way for us to rewrite our history and rewrite our stories and what is the truth and what's actually factual. And I think that's really relevant today with the anti-DEI, anti-wokeness, the erasure of Black American history, and the entire idea that we aren't a part of American history and that it can be rewritten to fit the ideals of others. And so those are racial stories. Those are myths. Those are things that did not happen, did not exist, or are extorted and edited in a way to fit a particular group. It's not what actually happened, which would be racial realities.
Yeah.
So if I think about, Amber, like to your point of all of these things happening over history where white people have proven that as soon as we build a thing, they're happy to come in and yank it back, right? They're happy to use white terror to frighten us and keep us from doing things. So we know that that side exists. And because of that, there are many people who are like, well, shouldn't we get a little get back, like at least in the form of reparations, right? Like, shouldn't there be some recourse for us over these, if we're just tying it to chattel slavery, or if we're looking at Jim Crow or redlining or massacre, right, insert tragedy, but reparations and this whole idea of reparations. So Taylor, we know in your work you are thinking a lot about this idea of reparation. So just for all of us, take us through step by step for somebody who is interested in that idea. How do you define it? And when you say that, what do you mean? How are you tying it? And let's just kind of take our time and talk about reparations and what that, like, why would that even be a thing?
I think reparations are so crucial. I think I'm going to start with like an argument against reparations, is that one of the big ones is that the people who experienced slavery and Jim Crow, a lot of them are not alive anymore. That's one of the big arguments against reparations. And here's how I feel about it. I feel like if you had a credit card company, right, and you took out a 400-year loan of money, just hear me out. You took out a 400-year loan of money and then told those creditors, well, I'm just not going to pay it back. And it's like, just because it's been X amount of years after you took out that loan, or say those creditors you took that loan out from, that bank doesn't exist, or those creditors don't exist, to say I'm not going to pay it back, to me is absolutely wild. And I see, like, okay, they're not alive anymore, but there are repercussions to what was done. It's still ongoing. It actually hasn't stopped. And that brings me to like my definitions of reparations, which I really had to separate myself from when doing this research. And my personal definition of reparations is, if you look at the other types of reparations, like Japanese internment camps and specifically the Holocaust, these reparations were given essentially after the things happened. Right. So Japanese internment camps, the internment camps ended. It was then accounted for how much money, how much these people lost. Reparations were then awarded. Same thing for the Holocaust. The Holocaust ended, and then it was like, okay, well, we're giving you payments until the day you die, or we're giving the children of these people payments, all these things. Where Black reparations in this sense and what's going on in the country right now, it feels almost, to me personally, that we're giving reparations for things that are still ongoing. And I don't think slavery ended. That's different. But in terms of the conversations now with all these local movements, a lot of it's for segregation and redlining, which is still very prevalent today, regardless of if it's legal or not. It would kind of be like giving reparations for mass incarceration with people still in jail for the crimes that they never should have been put in jail for. So it's not really a ding at the local initiatives that are going on across the nation. It's more so a me ideological thing, where I kind of see that difference in how we're defining reparations for Black Americans versus reparations for other groups. But reparations has a very broad definitions. I've looked at definitions from NCOBRA, the Movement for Black Lives, and the definitions really kind of fall between three different categories that I've seen, which is the tort, atonement, and in terms of Evanston, the housing or land-based model, property model. So the tort is cash payments. That's kind of the big one everyone talks about. That's the whole sensationalization of reparations is cash payments. The second one is atonement, which is more so like apologies, perhaps hyper investments into communities as opposed to individuals. So like scholarships, sometimes they say like museums, commemorations, things like that. And then the land and housing property model, which you see in Evanston, is kind of this idea of building wealth through home ownership, which in its own self, all the models have different pros and cons.
So it's so interesting that you talk about the different, how this reparations movement for Black American reparations, or I guess reparations in the United States, looks different than the other models, because you're right. Like, we won't stop disenfranchising, harming Black people, right? So that's why the idea of these people are gone is so ridiculous, because never in the history of this country have we bothered to be like, let's stop doing all the things that we've been doing to Black people since we first came. Like, let's just change how it shows up, but let's just keep on doing it. So that part to me is just crazy. But can we talk more about these three different categories? Like, in your work or your estimation, what do you think? I have some ideas and I'm willing to share. I'm sure Amber does too. And if we're just looking at these three, which we think would be more effective. But do you have a favorite model?
I do have a favorite model. I think my favorite model is very much rooted in my ideology, as opposed to research and what other reparations have been across history. And I do prefer the tort model. I do prefer cash payments. Not because the other models
Run
don't
me
work.
my money. Is that what you said,
Not
Taylor?
because the other models don't work, but because that's what everyone else got. So why are we any different? That's where my mindset's at. It's not even that, yeah, we actually do need a lot of help in terms of housing, affordable housing, things like that. We actually do need a formal apology from the federal government. That is very much true, and hyper investments into our community. But that's not what the Jewish community got. That's not what Japanese Americans got. They got cash. So why, and this is a beautiful quote from one of my respondents, why are we on training wheels, essentially?
That's not what the white people got either. After the Civil War, they got reparations and they started it. That's not what they got.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So that's my personal opinion on that.
Well, Amber, did you have anything else to say? Because you jumped in there really hot at the end. You good?
Same. I feel like there is a deep pathological commitment to the lie that money's not going to solve any problem for slavery with people who are already dead. And it's like, really? Because I'm willing to bet that there are a whole lot of Black people like me who wouldn't be six figures in student loan debt, or who might have been able to get out into the world and have a leg up instead of the money flowing backwards. Like, my parents are helping me instead of me sending my student loan money home to try to help my parents. Run me my money. I get my own therapy. I can work out my own issues for you, not apologizing to me. Pay me. Okay? Period.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think a part of it goes to like the pathology of Black people, right? Because y'all not gonna know what to do with the money. Y'all just gonna run through the money. Y'all just gonna waste the money, right? This is what people say, even people in our own community, right? Like, we can't have cash payments for reparations because we don't trust ourselves, and white America damn sure don't trust us with any money. And that part to me really pisses me off too, because I'm like, how dare y'all?
Says the white people who buy planets and stars and elephants and giraffes. It's like, Black people have the right to be average. Black people have the right to be reckless. Black people have the right to make bad decisions, just like white people. Anybody who has ever watched an episode of American Greed knows that there are white people who, when they come into large sums of money, do really, really stupid stuff every single day. And that's why they end up on American Greed most of the time.
I'm sorry, Taylor, you were about to say something.
No, it's okay. It is rooted in cultural racism. It's rooted in this idea that Black people simply can't handle it. And it's a racial story. It's a story, and racial stories become commonplace and the norm, even amongst the group that it's hurting. And the idea that we can't handle the money, white people think we can't handle the money, everyone else thinks we can't handle the money, which in essence, if it was truly reparations and it was given after the harm was over, that ideology wouldn't even exist. So, but we're still within a framework of intense violent racism. So I don't know how you operate in reparations within what's happening. That's just, I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's the part that's really hard to do. But again, to your thoughts about reparations, right? So we have this notion of reparations, and you've talked about it. We've just talked about how it's not just about chattel slavery, but in terms of your work and your view and how you're tying things together, are you looking at reparations just from the period of chattel slavery, or are you talking about, no, we're gonna, if Taylor is making the ideal reparations package, what are you connecting it to historically?
So I'm in my, so it's two different projects. I do have to start with that. So for my master's thesis, I actually studied Evanston, Illinois' city council, and how they actually passed the policy to begin with. This is a controversial policy. What ideologies, what rhetoric, what discourse was necessary to pass this policy in this city? And then for the dissertation, it was more so focused on the residents. What do the residents want? What do they need? And then also the reparations committee. How are they implementing and how are they operating? And so in terms of reparations and how I'm connecting them back, I think the master's was more so focused on the three models, tort, atonement, and land property. And the dissertation is actually focused, is very deeply steeped in theory. And so this theory of that you brought up a little bit earlier, you kind of touched on it, white lash, and conservative backlash. That's the main theory of one of my other chapters. And the chapter that I was talking about with the racial stories and racial realities, that's the theory for those chapters. So the dissertation is very rooted in understanding what's really going on and why is reparations in Evanston shaping out the way it is. So that's kind of how it started and that's how it ended. And it's just been really rich research. I've really enjoyed it.
So take us back a couple steps, because there are people who are like, I never heard of Evanston. I don't know where that is and what they're doing there. So just kind of give us the history of the project in Evanston.
Right. So in 2019, Evanston passed a policy called 126R19. And essentially, this policy defined a funding source for reparations within Evanston, Illinois. The funding source was cannabis sales. And essentially, as long as cannabis was selling within the city, it is within city limits, not within the state, that would fund reparations. Fast forward a couple years, they did add a different funding source, which was a property tax, real estate property tax, to help fund it a little faster because cannabis wasn't selling as well. So that's the first thing, though. It has two funding sources right now. The second thing is it is based on, you have to have lived in Evanston or be a descendant of someone who lived in Evanston from 1919 to 1969. It is also rooted in segregation and redlining. Evanston, from my research, actually does not have a history of slavery. So not a deep history of slavery, like people there owned slaves. So it's different than what reparations has been in other conversations, like HR 40, like other federal proposed policies or things like that. So, or even California, it's very different. California, I believe, is based on slavery, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that's kind of Evanston. They've been doing this since 2019. They did pass a policy shortly after called the Restorative Housing Program. And that is what their reparations is at this moment. They do plan on passing different programs to address different things. But currently the Restorative Housing Program does three things. It gives you a $25,000 award for, and this is kind of where the controversy comes in, but it gives you a $25,000 reward for either getting a mortgage. The second one is paying down a mortgage. So getting a home, paying down something on a home, or making home repairs. That was the original setup for reparations in Evanston. Then later on, I believe in 2023, 2023 most likely, Evanston passed cash payments, which was a big thing that a lot of people in Evanston wanted, was cash payments. Like, why are you controlling what I do with the money? You know, as one of my respondents said, I'm grown. I know what I can do with that money. I don't need you to only give it to a contractor and for it to never touch my hands. What if I want to pay down a student loan? What if I want to get, $10,000 on my house, but $10,000 somewhere else? And even after they passed the cash payments, and one of the meetings that I that's in my dissertation that I talk about. They even said like, well, let's just tell them that's what it should be for. So even then they really couldn't take their hold off of it. And I do want to preface that with saying, I don't think it's fully because they don't believe Black people can handle money. I do think it's rooted in constitutionality and legality, which is a huge thing going on right now in terms of attacking the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. And also I think it might be helpful for people just to have a little background about that time period of, what was it, 1919 to 1960, 69, the Great Migration. And I only want to bring that up because it's so important, because I think there is a myth that there was the North, then there was the South, slavery's in the South. There was a very particularly violent history that Black people encountered when they came north during the Great Migration, particularly to places like Chicago, where there were housing tenements. Black people were paying 3 and 4 times more in rent. They were being forced to live on top of each other. And even in places like Evanston, where Black people finally could go to live, because for a long time the suburbs did not want Black people there, period. And there's a suburb in Chicago, I can't think of the name of it, but there was a humongous riot there where they like literally firebombed a whole apartment building and killed white people too when a Black family tried to move in. And so I do think it's important for people to recognize that, because that's part of what gets lost here, is that people assume that why would you pay reparations for something that was going on in the 20s all the way through the 60s? And that's because that's why. Because even though there was no formal Jim Crow in the North, when Black people got there, they still faced very real systemic and structural racism in the form of housing discrimination, job discrimination, wage discrimination, lack of access to resources that was separate and distinct from enslavement.
Exactly.
And so, Taylor, I'm interested in 2 things. I'm interested in why Evanston, like why they kick this off as opposed to insert any other city. And then I'm also interested in the idea of how they got white people to agree to this, because I just don't understand how we get the white people to agree.
So based on my research for my master's, when I really went through the city council, at the very least, the city council and I think a lot of the residents really pride themselves on being progressive and liberal. They do. It's not everybody, obviously, because there's people who disagree, and even as one of my respondents said, there's this moderate people there who are kind of like, not sure. But for the most part, a lot of people in Evanston do perceive themselves as being very, very progressive. Although in my research, there was still signs of colorblind racism. There were still signs of the white racial frame. There were still signs of racism underlying within the city. And the Black residents were very aware of this, obviously. They were like, well, no, they're not as progressive as they say. While my white respondents are very much like, this is a progressive city. It's a wonderful city. My master's is titled The Most Livable City in America, ? Because they do strive for that. In a lot of the government documents, it says we strive to be the most livable city in America. And so again, the most livable city in America, ? Is that what it really is? And then kind of following it with what ideologies and discourse were necessary to pass this policy. So I think it's very much rooted in a situation and a time. It's rooted in, and then you have to think about it. It was pre-George Floyd. The passing of this policy was pre-George Floyd. George Floyd actually had not happened yet. So I think it was a very interesting time in this city, and they take pride in it. They talk about it a lot in their meetings, that they were the first to pass this, and they should be proud of that. But also that because they were the first to pass with this, there's no blueprint, essentially. So they do state that yeah, they're kind of navigating in the best way they know how. And I think that's why it's kind of come to where it is now in terms of constitutional legality, as well as kind of fighting conservative lawyers who threatened to sue them back in as soon as the policy came out, and then have now officially sued them as of last year. So that's underway. I did look at that right before we hopped on to make sure there weren't any updates. There are no updates on that I saw in terms of the lawsuit. But yeah, that was the whole thing they were trying to avoid, or at the very least be prevalent. They were trying to avoid it, but if it did happen, prevail in that. And that's kind of how Evanston's reparations took the shape it did.
So you mentioned before that they did make a move towards cash payments. Did people get this $25,000, or
Yes.
is that so? There were people who got the $25,000.
Yes, and that's actually very shortly before they were sued. So, if you look at the connections, I don't have, like, I can't go and ask the lawyers, like, was that the reason you sued them because they moved to cash payments, or were you planning this the whole time and they just aligned in that way? I actually don't know that answer. But as I talk about in my dissertation, this might be a very harsh thing to say, but I feel like Evanston's kind of in a hostage situation between conservatives and white lash, because they've been trying to avoid this white lash and conservative backlash in these lawsuits for years. And then they made one step out of line with the cash payments and immediately are sued. And again, that's my perception of it. But even without the lawsuit, they've been operating in a way that really has decentered certain Black Evanston voices. Now, has it decentered all Black Evanston voices? No, but it's definitely decentered the ones that have been demanding cash payments. It took them a while to get cash payments. They had to come, this particular resident had to come to every meeting demanding it, every single meeting demanding these cash payments. And they finally let up and gave it to them. Now, there were people on the committee who also agreed, who were fighting for these cash payments. I don't want to say that the whole committee disagreed, but it was a battle to get that. And then on top of that, they really aren't, and this isn't to Evanston, this is kind of reparations broadly, they're really operating in a space where reparations can't thrive right now.
Right.
It just really, it's not to say that, the whole thing, I think it's the famous Martin Luther King quote where you're always telling us to wait. And I'm not necessarily telling people to wait, but I'm saying this political climate may not be conducive to a reparations policy. And Evanston passed it well before what was going on now, pre-George Floyd. But now looking at it where we are right now, new reparations policies, I would be very surprised. I would not be surprised to see other reparations policies begin to be sued around the country, along with things like the Fearless Fund and things like that. So it's an interesting time for reparations. I would be very interested to see how this pans out in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
So thinking about the current political climate, and Evanston is one small place, right? I'm not going to even talk about they're giving people $25,000. And I don't know much about housing. My nephew goes to Northwestern, but I know that the houses in Evanston, my God, that's not even your 10% down. Like
We're
the houses in
We're
Evanston.
aligned on that.
So I'm gonna ignore, but Evanston is one small place, right? So if we look at the United States as a whole, because I would also like my reparations, right? I would also like to stand in line. Would you say you want yours too, Amber? So I'm just like, how can, for people who are working in the space, what is the level of optimism like in terms of having a national reparations package? Because, and can you also tell us about HR 40 when you enter this? Because when the little I know about HR 40 is that it was to study. It wasn't to give out any money. HR 40 was just an investigation. Like, we don't know what happened, and we got to
It was
study.
a feasibility study. That's it.
So, yeah.
It is two things with that. I think I'm going to address the HR 40 first. So HR 40, yes, HR 40 is to study if reparations should even happen in the U.S. I am pretty positive the United Nations has already said yes. If I'm not mistaken, fact check me on that. But I think
that
it
is
was
true.
already recommended. Yeah, I think that was already recommended by the United Nations for Black Americans to receive reparations.
The United Nations also told us there was a genocide in Palestine, and the U.S. didn't care about that. So anyway,
yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah. Lots of things being said to the United States that they completely ignore. But HR 40 is to study. And I think they don't want to study it because it's obviously going to reveal that it should happen. Like, why are you afraid to study something that, it's kind of like the whole thing I say, like, why are you taking away someone's legal right to read if they couldn't read in the first place? Because they're not even human. That doesn't make sense. Like, you don't have to make a law to say dogs shouldn't read. Like, you don't have to do that because they probably are not going to read at a 12th grade level. But if you have to make a law to say this shouldn't happen, or you have to worry about studying something because it's going to reveal something, that in itself is very telling. And then what was the second part of your question? I think
well, I'm just like, how optimistic are people that this can even happen, right? Like, we're just talking about studying reparations. The idea that people would actually get some type of reparations package.
I think if you could have taken this conversation back a couple years, I think the optimism would have been a lot higher. I think right now, reparations is going to be on the back burner. It's kind of like, like I said, reparations is supposed to be something that's supposed to repair, restore these communities, but also it's supposed to be, in my personal opinion, there are multiple definitions. I think these definitions are multiple because we were never repaired in the first place. So now we kind of have to do the repair now. It's different to where, you know, some of these other huge events, like I said, the Japanese internment camps, the Holocaust, these tragedies weren't 400 years long. They weren't. And so we're having to make extreme repairs to the community. And so I think that's why the definitions between me and some other people are very different, because I'm kind of like, that's not how it was done in other places, but I completely see why it's like, we need to repair these communities now. We can't worry about what happened then. We have to do this now. And so in terms of optimism, I think some people remain optimistic because that's what they do. They have to. Yeah. And I think you have to really be very optimistic in this policy climate, because if you let naysayers and people who are very unoptimistic or people who really like, you can't do this, kind of get in your way, you're not going to get anything done. And so I think optimism is key, but also we have to be realistic. And I don't think the climate we're in right now is conducive to reparations. I actually think there are other really, really important things going on. Just like the loss of rights for
just civil rights.
Everybody.
A lot of people. Like, I mean, a lot of rights being lost. We got women, minorities, immigrants, everybody. Like, it's just, so reparations is really important, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't resurface for the next couple of years, at least not in the ways it has been in the past.
And also, just because we're talking about poverty as a mindset, just to sort of give context to people in this modern era. So I'm talking about like since 1980, there's only been 2 feasibility studies that have failed in Congress. And that is the feasibility study in HR 40, which is to study reparations, and the feasibility study to study gun violence. And so when you think about why Black people are impoverished, literally in our bodies, in our minds, in our pocketbooks, think about the things that Congress won't even put money towards investigating. Gun violence, right? Because if we start studying gun violence, imagine what that might tie back to. Over policing, redlining, how these weapons are getting here in the first place, and then reparations. And I think that is not ironic at all, and really as American as it gets, that those are the only 2 feasibility studies that have failed in the post-Reagan era. So yes, when you talk about why we are impoverished, hello.
Yeah, and Taylor, I'm also thinking about, like, I don't want to lack optimism, even though I normally do. But if I'm thinking about you and your work and the current political climate and the future of your work, where do you go from here? Because like you've talked about, right, with white lash and white rage and snatching back civil rights and all of these, like rolling back all of these things that have happened over the past decades, what does somebody like you work on in the future when all this stuff is going to be tied up in legal battles? Like, what happens next?
That's a great question. I can give you my wish list and then my what's actually going to happen list. But my wish list, I really would like to study Black women in the reparations space. They're very instrumental, as we always have been in the political space. But just like reparations in Evanston, that Robin Ruth Simmons, that is a Black woman. The Black woman who passed the policy right before that, Cicely Fleming, that's a Black woman. That was 58R or something. I wish I had it in front of me, but that was essentially Evanston acknowledging, you know, the racism, the segregation, the discrimination, right before that reparations policy passed. I believe a reparations policy just passed in Washington, D.C. Black women were very instrumental in that. Again, these are like to studies or like to look at it. These aren't like passing, giving people money. But just like as things are moving forward, Black women have always been there. And so I really would love to know, how does that work for them? Also, because reparations is has been historically very gender neutral. It's not like we need reparations for Black women specifically for the Black maternal health crisis. We need reparations for Black men specifically for X, Y, and Z. It's very gender neutral in terms of building the community up as a whole, but our realities are not gender neutral. So I'm very interested in understanding how Black women are maneuvering in this space, and if they are bringing their gendered identities into this, or if they're leaving it out. I'd love to understand that, and that's what I would love to do with reparations moving forward. in terms of what might actually happen, I think that's very much up in the air. I think journals may continue. Again, that's a huge may. I'm surprised every day at what happens on the news. Surprised and not surprised. I'm shocked but not surprised. But very, you know, we hope. I think it was the CDC that recently struck down all this language around gender and sexuality. I think it was like, you can't say birthing person, you can't say biological female, biological male, you can't, like, all these different things. So if that's what the CDC is doing, what's going to come down for these journals that are talking about? I mean, it literally talks about white lash and racism in the paper. It does not sugarcoat it. So the question is, like, how, I don't even want to say maneuvering through this. How are we going to push through this to keep our research as true to the story as possible and not be censored? And so for that answer, I say I really don't know where it's going to go. Not for just for me personally, but for the discipline of sociology as a whole. I am really worried about that.
Can I before we get off of here, can I be messy for a second, Taylor? And I don't even know if you know what I'm about to ask, but I'm gonna just be messy for a second and just tell me I'm being messy. But I'm sure you're doing work reparations, so you know the group American Descendants of Slavery.
ADOS.
And yes,
ADOS, yeah.
yes. And their talk about reparations and what that means, and this very sort of, in my view, this xenophobic approach to reparations. Like, have you looked at all in terms of not just ADOS, but other groups, how sort of in the present day, there are these different factions in the reparations movement, and is there any cohesion, or is there just a bunch of infighting? How does it look on the inside for people who claim that they're advocating for reparations?
Oh, you messy. Oh, you messy.
It's very interesting. It was a little messy. It was a little messy, just slightly messy. A little messy. It's messy, but it's a valid question. It's not like a not valid question, so it's okay.
Are the people fighting?
I think so. There's this term that I use in definitely in my master's, a little bit of my dissertation, not really, called consensus building, and this idea of, like, can we come to a consensus? And I think one of the things that kind of came out of it was that you don't necessarily have to be on the same page for how it gets done, but you do have to be on the same page for the goal. Like, the goal of like desegregation, or the goal of, like, actually having resources, or the goal needs to be the same or similar. You got to be working towards the same thing for it to be successful, or for at least for you to work together for it to be successful. That's kind of the conclusion I kind of came with too. And things just don't work out like that. So scholars are at odds. The people on the ground, the actual people implementing it, the grassroots people, are at odds. The residents are at odds. Everyone has a different idea of what should happen. And unfortunately, there's kind of these, like, I don't think the right word would be hierarchies. I don't think that's the correct word, but there are different factions of who's listened to and who's not. And I think that in itself is very interesting, kind of like, and I talk about in my research for my dissertation, there is a faction within Evanston of residents who really are completely ignored. And some of the things they say are very valid. Like one of the big things was, like, we deserve cash payments. This isn't reparations. Why are you giving me money to pay down a mortgage? Because first of all, if you think about housing, who has access to housing? In terms of Americans in general, getting housing is hard. Owning a home is difficult. Now add in the layer of, I'm a Black individual who needs this, along with other Americans who, you need to have your credit score. You need to have the down payment. You need to have, the ability to find a home, because in this housing crisis. So with all of that, even in the sense of how do you achieve that, is very difficult. So I think the factions, and then there's other factions among scholars where, like I mentioned, the atonement model, the one scholar I use for the atonement model does not agree with the tort model at all. So scholars are even kind of at odds. And then in terms of the politics and political people, you have, Black conservatives who are like, I don't want your handout. And then you have Black people who are like,
can we get rid of them first?
Or give it to me. Give me your handout.
I'm just saying, like, it is messy, but it's as messy as anything else. I don't think it's beyond any other policy where you have different odds and different ways of doing things, especially when it comes to restoring communities, because everyone has a different way of doing it. And I think if you can come to the same goal, like the goal is to restore the community, or the goal is to give cash, or the goal is to invest in these things, or can we, kind of like how Evanston did, can we combine the three models in a way that fits, that we can actually move forward? I think that would be very beneficial. Do I think it's going to happen amongst this political climate just because that's not on the front burner? It's kind of on the back burner right now. I don't think that'll come to fruition very soon. But I think once reparations resurfaces, because one thing that we are very resilient. I think when reparations will resurface, and when it does, that conversation will start back up.
Well, Taylor, thank you for joining us and for coming to talk about Evanston and reparations, and for, showing us all the different things that are possible. But yeah, I think run me my money. I would like cash, please. And then I will decide how I wish to use that money, if I want to build in my community, or if I want to buy a house, or whatever I want to do with it. Thank you very much, people.
Okay, because the bottom line is, my poverty is not a mindset. It's a real reality.
Poverty is not a mindset. No,
it's a reality
at all. But John Hope Bryant told y'all, if y'all will follow his program, y'all will be able to get a house. So apparently y'all can't follow instructions, which is why you don't have one, beyond having a poverty mindset. But Taylor, before we let you go, tell the brokers where they can find you, if you want them to find you out in these streets.
Best way to find me in terms of my research would be LinkedIn. So, just type in Taylor Darks, Florida State University, LinkedIn. If that's where you want to connect with me. I do not have an academic social media, mainly because I'm kind of in the applied sector. So, yes, LinkedIn's great.
Taylor say,
you have questions.
You're not going to see her shake and tell on her IG. She keeps it professional. Find her on LinkedIn. That's what Taylor said. I know that's right. I know that's right. Well, Taylor, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Brokish. So, Amber, what homework do you have for the people today?
So, my homework is, if you feel so inclined, and I hope you feel so inclined, I think that it would be very enriching to your impoverished mindset for you to take a peek at HR 40 just to see what it says. And there's a syllabus, so you don't have to read the whole thing, but the syllabus is like 3 pages. So at least just look at it. And I want you to, hop in the comments on social media and let's talk about it. Because one of the funny things about HR 40 is that everybody who went to bat about how horrible it was like, this is about reparations and repairing for people who are not here. The question on the floor is, should we even take a step to look into it, to see who, what, when, where, and why? So just read the syllabus so you can be informed when you have the conversation. That's the only homework.
Okay. I'm going to be quiet. It's a bunch of things I want to say about HR 40, but I'm going to just be quiet and sit here and be like, y'all, I really hate that we had to have an entire season debunking ideology from a Black man. It hurts me, but this is where we are. Look at us. And at the same time, we can't say that we love Black people, but then refuse to call them out when they're wrong and their messages are harmful. And we think he's wrong and his messages are harmful. And I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about this idea of financial literacy and thinking about things like poverty mindsets. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that financial literacy, knowing about your money and all of these things are inherently bad. But I do think that it is folly for us to believe that as a community, the things that are happening to us are because of just about the thoughts we have in our head. It is because every time we do something, white America is happy to come and snatch it away from us. So brokers, let's keep pushing back. Let's keep doing what we've been doing in our quest to gain access to everything that we're owed. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of Brokish.
All right, good people. Thanks for listening to Brokish. For more episodes, visit us at brokish.com or subscribe, and Brokish will get direct deposited into your favorite podcast app on the 1st and 15th. Share Brokish with your friends and join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Music for Brokish is Come Get Some by Blank and Kit. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.